Hello, my friends. Welcome once again to another edition of Spiritism, a closer look. You are on Kardec Radio, and we do this every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm Luiz Lima, your host for tonight. And in this program, we're going to take a closer look at spiritual maturity. It's an interesting topic. It has several, we can get to this in several different ways. So let's get to it and see how Spiritism can help us understand that. I think the first question is, what exactly does it mean, spiritual maturity? Because it has to be well known so we know what needs to be addressed here. So spiritual maturity, it's in reference to a process of becoming a better person. And I would say by improving our character, our actions, our attitudes. So it's not, spiritual maturity is not perfection. It's more like a set of milestones on the way to perfection, towards perfection. Spiritual maturity is progress, which, as we know, is either it's both moral and intellectual progress. However, intellectual progress comes before moral progress, and the reason is by advancing intellectually, we have better knowledge and are more prone to make better choices in the future. So spiritual intellectual progress comes before moral progress. But spiritual maturity is this progress over a series of lifetimes or incarnations, if you will, to ultimately achieve and be in harmony with the laws of God, which right now, in the stage that we are, in terms of evolution, right here on planet Earth, we are not in line with the laws of God. We are not in harmony with it. You just take the news and you can see. Of course, there's a long way to go here. There's a lot to be learned by all of us, myself included. And like I said, it's a process. It's not spiritual maturity. It's not perfection. It's not even about not suffering and escaping suffering and pain altogether. It's more about understanding the purpose of these things, suffering and pain, and step up from there. But we need to understand first, and a lot of us here on earth still do not understand the meaning and the reason for suffering and pain, which, by the way, we have addressed this several times in the past. Spiritism makes it very, very clear what suffering is doing in our lives and what pain is doing in our lives. So this spiritual maturity sits somewhere between simple and ignorant, which is the very beginning, and perfection, which is the goal. It's in between. And that somewhere is different for everyone. It's not the same for everyone. For example, it's not something that is preset. For example, after a certain number of incarnations, you achieve spiritual maturity. No, it's personal, it's not transferable, and it has to be, it ties into the spiritual history that each one of us bring. We got here to this point by making our choices, and we all made different sets of different choices from the beginning. So we are all at different levels, and we had different histories, spiritual history. So how do we know if we are at that level, spiritual maturity? So let's talk about the other side first. What would be signs of spiritual immaturity? We can start right there. So here are some signs. Here are some ideas that we can throw. Intolerance, impatience, vanity, selfishness, These things are all signs of spiritual immaturity, practice of vices, practice of vices. We have a tendency to blame others for our suffering, for our pain, and even worse, we have the tendency to blame God for our suffering, which is obviously an absurd, but from most of us, that's what we think, that's what we go by. So spiritual immaturity can also be seen with this attachment to material things, materialism in general, to social status, resistance to forgiveness. Sometimes we know we have to forgive. We have the desire to forgive. Everything is in place, the right time. The person who needs to ask for forgiveness and the person who supposedly is going to forgive, everything is in place. But the person who needs to ask for forgiveness just can't do it. It will not come out of their mouth because of our level of advancement. The stage that we are, which is very low when you look at the spirit scale, is very low. So we go through all these things daily. And those are all, I just gave you a few here, those are all signs of spiritual immaturity. And that's what we need to get away from to get to spiritual maturity. And for that, we can see this in three parts, spiritual maturity. Let's talk about this in three different parts. Number one, the practice of moral virtues. Number two, the inner peace and acceptance, important. And third, intellectual clarity. So let's talk a little bit about each one of them here, starting with the moral virtues. We're talking about signs of spiritual maturity. Moral virtues is one of them. Like charity. Charity, it could be in thought or in action. They're both moral virtues. So they are positive things. They are things that will count on our favor, per se. Here's another one, forgiveness. And forgiveness usually, not always, but usually attaches to the ability to understand other people's weaknesses. You usually forgive because the person has weaknesses, like we did. And here's another moral virtues, humility, detachment from ego. Those are all moral virtues that we can practice. And as we do, we're going to approach those the set of milestones, spiritual maturity. So we spoke about the practice of moral virtues. The second thing about considering signs of spiritual maturity is what I call the inner peace and acceptance. What exactly is that? Well, first of all, it's acceptance, which is very hard, by the way. The acceptance of trials that we have to undergo. And those are consequences of our past actions in this lifetime or previous lifetimes. So we go through trials and expiations. So accepting those puts us at peace. It brings inner peace. Because when we accept, we see those no longer as a problem, as this mountain ahead of us. We see them as opportunities for growth. You see, if you want to get to spiritual maturity, we need to look ahead. It's always looking ahead. Growth is ahead of us. So accepting the trials and expiations we need to go through are opportunities for growth. I might not make use of those opportunities. That's a whole different story. That's free will. But that's what they are. Another thing that, brings peace and serenity uh, into our souls is the ability to maintain our serenity amidst all these difficulties that we go through in our daily lives, in our city, in our country, in the world. We see bad news and bad energy floating all over the place. But some people, very few, but some people, they maintain themselves serene amidst all this thing. That's a sign that they have inner peace. They have accepted the world as is, and they carry inner peace, which is a sign of spiritual maturity. It's very few people that can do this, but yes, there are. And throughout the history of humanity, we have several of them. Not even talking about Jesus, because he's a total exception. But several people were able to demonstrate this inner peace, this serenity, even when things don't look so good for most of us. Also, this acceptance to have this feeling of inner peace has to do with accepting the fact that our inner transformation allows us to qualify and help others. Inner transformation allows us qualify to help other people. The minute that we are able to help other people, really help. I'm not talking about just money here and there. Really help get into the core of their soul and be able to help them, whether they're going through a hard time for whatever reason, diseases, a lot of times, right? They need support. We need to accept the fact that my inner transformation is going to allow me to support them better. So instead of just panicking because they're going through those things, I'm going to understand their weaknesses, that they have to, it's something personal and not transferable that they have to go through, and I'm going to be able to help. I'm here to help. So the inner peace that we feel in acceptance of things as they are, by understanding what they mean, that is a sign of spiritual maturity as well. And the third thing is intellectual clarity. Again, our progress is partially intellectual, partially moral, but intellectual comes first. And what is exactly what I mean by intellectual clarity? It's like this. We value reasoning above all things in search for the truth. We have this reason. Let me be rational here. Let me seek for the truth. And we go on our journey seeking for the truth. It's like seeking truth, but we value reason. It matters. Not simply emotionally, oh, I heard this and that's the absolutely truth. And it is the truth because I said so. This is lack of reasoning. Intellectual clarity is that the ability to analyze situations. Am I doing this in a reasonable way? Is there reason here? Here's another thing about intellectual clarity. To question dogmas. You see, it doesn't mean, let's make it very clear, questioning dogmas does not mean to disrespect someone else's beliefs. We can question dogmas, but please respect the others, other people's belief systems. Why do we question dogmas? Because that's exactly what Spiritism teaches us. Ask everything and anything as much as you can, because that's what learning comes from. Spiritism is philosophy. Philosophy, simply speaking, is questions and answers. Intellectual clarity also means to understand the spiritual principles, how things work in the spirit world deeply, not just, oh, I heard this. No, let's get to it. Let's read, let's understand, let's study. It also means intellectual clarity to have discernment, which kind of goes along with valuing reason. And another thing about intellectual clarity, to detach from material possessions. And why do I categorize this? Why did I put this under intellectual clarity? Again, reason. When someone dies, the laptop stays on the desk, the car stays in the garage, the chair stays by the table. Nothing goes with them. That's the only thing, regardless of belief system, that we all agree on. And by belief system, I don't mean religion. I mean belief system. Materialism is a belief system and it has to be respected. Spiritualism, Spiritism is another one. Different religions, Christianity and all its denominations, Judaism, Islam, and everything else, those are all belief systems. Regardless of atheism, regardless of belief system, the only thing we all agree on is the material possessions stay behind. That said, it doesn't make sense, or I'm not being reasonable, if I live my whole life targeting to achieve something only material, to have material possessions without any other principle, without any other reason and goal. That's a matter of reason, which demonstrate it's a sign of spiritual maturity. So how do we develop this spiritual maturity? How do we get there? How do we go about this? So I would say three things. Number one, self-knowledge. Self-knowledge, not as complicated as we sometimes think of. How am I going to know myself? Know thyself, right? We're going to go a lot easier than this. Examples of self-knowledge. In speaking of achieving or developing spiritual maturity, examples of self-knowledge. My inventory of beliefs. What do I believe? Do I believe in abortion? Yes or no? Do I believe in death penalty? Yes or no? That's me talking to myself, running down my list of my inventory of beliefs. If I still believe in things, just like I said, death penalty, abortion, killing, and so, I'm too far from the first milestone, which is spiritual maturity. So that's self-knowledge. Examination of conscience. We do things, we have we have bad days and good days. It's just part of it. On the days that are a little bit more challenging, more complicated, that we usually call bad days or difficult days, okay, that's fine. That was a complicated day. All right. So yesterday was this complicated, very difficult day. I did this and I did that. Was that okay? Yes or no? Did I do it right? Yes or no? It's an inner talk. That's self-knowledge. Here's another thing we can do for self-knowledge: self-criticism. It doesn't mean public acknowledgement of things that I don't do right or I'm not good at. It's just personal. It's inner talk. All these things, they will help us develop self-knowledge. Number 2, in how to develop spiritual maturity. Number 1 was self-knowledge. Number 2, servicing others, service to others. And that could be some sort of voluntary work, compassion, moral support. For example, in cases of natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis, and all of those natural disasters, we can do voluntary work. And we don't have to be in the place where the disaster happened. You can help by, for example, if there's a natural disaster, let's just say in the west coast of the US, people in the east coast and other places can just, gather goods and food and things that are necessary to send over to those who suffered with the natural disaster, because they don't have supermarket open to buy food. They don't have this and that. So we, on the other side of the country, or even on the planet, can do that. We can provide it, and it's voluntary. You never go to do one of these things expecting payment. It's simply voluntary work. I feel like, oh my God, these people are suffering. Let me help a little bit. It's simple. Moral support, compassion. For example, cancer patients. They need support. They need, like others, intercessory prayer. We can do that. That's servicing to others. We can do acts of kindness without expectation. Not kindness as a reaction to something someone did towards us. Kindness as an action, not reaction. And it's a simple thing. You're in the supermarket line for the cashier. Somebody behind you has 2 items. You have 50. You can just look back and say, go ahead. That's simple. That's kindness as an action, not reaction. And another way to serve others, which is specific to some people, mediumship as a service. Mediums are incarnated here, and they're supposed to use that ability that they bring with them to help other people. Healing mediumship, for example. But all of this has to be grounded in humility. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. So if we go back to the signs of spiritual maturity, there's a third thing to consider, which is study and enlightenment. Deepen the understanding of life and death, or life and the afterlife. Deepen that study that will enlighten us. You see, life and death, if you think about it, they are concepts that can't be separated. They're part of the same thing. And interestingly, I would even go further to say that interestingly, death is what gives meaning to life. So if we live our lives knowing what comes after life, we can live a better life. We already know what to expect, what's going on. So that study, that enlightenment, that deepen the understanding of this. So for example, understanding better losses of loved ones. We have a hard time with that, most of us, in the level that we are. Still, Spiritism gives us a lot of insight, a lot of understanding on how to see this from a different angle. We've discussed this here a few times. Another thing about study and enlightenment: participate in study groups. Study groups are interesting because whether if it's a text that you guys read together and everybody makes a comment, whether it's somebody bringing questions and everybody, gives an input, it doesn't really matter. But when you study in groups, you have a lot more input, a lot more material to think through than if you're alone reading a book, for example. So study groups for enlightenment, for better understanding all of this, is very good. And Spiritist centers are exactly for that. Spiritist centers are spaces for collective growth, mutual support, shared experiences. And these things, doing in groups, collective growth, accelerates maturity. We rise together, not alone, which is more difficult. So a Spiritist center has that role. And I want to address something here so we can wrap up, which is the role of suffering and pain in all of this. Because as we go along, we undergo suffering and pain, and we always think it's excessive. So let's think about this for a little bit. Suffering and pain will show up. They will show up on the journey because they have to do with past actions. What's done is done. So we're going to have to offset. So these things will show up. I just need to understand that they are tools for growth. They are tools for growth. Pain can break down pride. People in pain, they are reluctant, but there's a point where they say, oh, no, I need help. That's what it means. Pain can break down pride. Pain can teach resilience. It invites for reflection. And suffering is another tool for awakening the soul. It's like a red flag. So maturity involves transforming suffering into spiritual strength. Instead of suffering, let's use the moment, that suffering, as stepping stones. So in the depths of our soul, we carry the potential for good and evil. How we develop is on us. Spiritual maturity requires a divine component because it has to do with perfection. That's part of the journey towards perfection. So it requires a divine component. So the more I block or I shut my heart to this divine light, the worse it gets. That's the acceptance that we just spoke about. Accepting means opening our hearts for divine light. So spiritual maturity is not a final goal. It's a point of reference in the journey to perfection. And in this journey, there's going to be a point where collaboration is more visible than competition. Tolerance is more visible than intolerance. Humbleness is more visible than pride. Modesty is more visible than vanity. Peace is more visible than war. Love is more visible than hatred. So in short, there's going to be a point where good is more visible than evil. Now, that will happen by choice, not by design. There won't be a divine decree coming down our mailbox saying, as of tomorrow, you're perfect, or you have achieved spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity happens when we depart from evil and set sail towards goodness. It's something to think about. So I wanted to thank you all for following us here. Thank you, River Flowers, for participating with us. And again, we will be here next week on Wednesday. We do this every Wednesday, by the way, at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you very much for participating tonight. And we will be here next week.